So our esteemed panelists this evening are, drum roll, Jack Straw, the former UK Foreign Secretary under Tony Blair, Ergün Olgun, the Special Representative of the TRNC, President Ersin Tatar, Lord Northbrook, co-chair of the APPG on the TRNC, Sir David Amess, the Member of Parliament for Southend West, Professor Hasan Ünal, Professor of Political Science and International Relations at Maltepe, Istanbul. Thank you all for joining us. Given the success of our last two events and the 90+ questions we actually didn't get around to answering, this evening we're going to kick off straight away with our first question, which is to the former Foreign Secretary, Jack Straw. The question is this: why has President Tatar in the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus moved away from the bizonal bifederal settlement model to an agreement that needs to be based on sovereign equality and the equal international status of the two sides? Jack Straw, over to you.
Thank you very much, Brooks, and good evening to everybody who's on this webinar. President Tatar has to speak for himself, and I can't do that. But my guess is that his answer to this question is the same as mine and many other people's, which is that the idea of a bizonal, bifederal Cyprus is no longer possible. And the experience in Cyprus since 1960, but particularly since 2004-05, proves that there was a perfectly workable constitution agreed as a precursor to independence in 1960. That was honoured in the breach increasingly by the Greek Cypriots, and then by the colonels in Greece itself, who wished to see Enosis unity with the whole of the island of Cyprus in 1974, and there was terrible massacres of the Turkish Cypriots. Rolling forward, a huge amount of work was put in by the United Nations, by Kofi Annan, his special representatives, by the United Kingdom government, many others, to develop a workable plan, which was put to the parties at Bergenstock in 2004. And it was signed up to not only by the North, but also by the Greek Cypriots. And then bluntly, so-called President Papadopoulos ratted on that, tore up what he'd agreed, and campaigned against a referendum to which he had been committed. The big mistake made by the European Union, of which I was a part, and I kicked myself for this, is allowing a divided Cyprus to come into the European Union as a single entity. And from that, a huge amount of trouble, I'm afraid, has flown. Where we now are is that there is absolutely no incentive for Greek Cyprus to go for any kind of power sharing. The status quo absolutely suits them. They technically, in international law, represent the whole of the island, hence the arguments about hydrocarbons around the island. They've got the European Union in their paw, and any bizonal, bifederal structure would involve them diluting the power that they have for not very much. And there are some Greek Cypriots, of course, who think that it's essential that they go down that route, but they will never gain any political traction within their system. So a two-state solution, which is, after all, the solution which has been done elsewhere in the world in the last 20 years, is, in my view, both sensible and necessary. The question is how you get there, and that requires TRNC and Turkey and the friends of both better to argue why there is this situation and to ensure that history is not, frankly, just written by the Greek Cypriots. There are a lot of interests to overcome. Russia will stick to the Greek Cypriots like glue for a whole variety of both historical, religious, and these days financial reasons, given the way that Greek Cyprus has become a subsidiary of Russian finance. And if you look at the extraordinary amounts of money that go through the Greek Cypriot banking system, not for their purposes, but basically washing money from Russia. But they have a problem with them because they sit on the Security Council. I'm not clear where China is on this, but it would be interesting. They probably want to make a certain amount of mischief out of the situation. There's a difficulty with the United Kingdom. When I wrote about this in 2013, 14, in articles in the Times and elsewhere, and spoke about it, quite a lot of colleagues on both sides, including those in very senior positions, came up to me and said privately they agreed with me, but they didn't see how the United Kingdom could shift its position. It requires others to shift as well. Part of that just fact of life is that the United Kingdom has a sovereign bases, and they're in the south, in the Greek Cypriot part of the country. And you may or may not regret the fact that they're there, but they are our sovereign bases. They are British land. That's easy to say, but very, very difficult to defend them were there an invasion, for example, by the Greek Cypriot populace onto them. So that has to be borne in mind. And it goes back to my point. I'm not in any doubt that a two-state solution is the only answer, and it's the only answer if you want a settlement on this island, because the Greek Cypriots have made any alternative impossible. And it's also the only answer in terms of justice for the Turkish Cypriots. But to get there, it's about making, the solution is straightforward. It's about making the argument and trying to shift international opinion, including in Washington, let me say, because at the moment, the default setting of those is, well, Turkey invaded. There wasn't really any reason for Turkey to invade, as if even Turkey was going to invade just for the devil of it. But Turkey invaded, and it's been occupying this territory ever since, and they should be cleared off. Well, that's not going to happen for kickoff, and it's a rewriting of terrible abuse by the Greek colonels and their acolytes in Greek Cyprus against the Turkish Cypriot community. But it's about the argument, making the argument, because unless we can shift international...
Yeah, if I can interrupt there, but it's also about leverage. And, we found in the past that people don't move their positions unless there's any form of leverage. And it's interesting, just as an aside, you talk about Russian influence, but Russia now has quite a strong relationship with Erdogan with respect to Syria and respect to sales of arms at the moment. So I'm wondering if you see any shift in what's going on with the Russians with respect to playing a more constructive role in this, number one. And number two, are there any points of leverage that the EU themselves could use to try and change the Greek position on this?
Well, just taking your second point first, there are plenty of points of leverage which the European Union could use. We got close to that in April 2004 because there was fury amongst foreign ministers and heads of government. Just a second, because my battery is running low. So just a second. There was, here we go. There was fury, there you go. Yeah, amongst heads of government and foreign ministers all around the table in April 2004 about what Papadopoulos and the Greek Cypriots had done. But I'm sorry to say we didn't follow that through by saying we're not having Greek Cyprus inside the European Union. And now it is. It's much easier for them to exert influence than it is for others. And it has to be done indirectly by pressure on other European countries. As for Russia, yes, at the moment, they've got a kind of marriage or semi-marriage of convenience with Turkey. Dr. Ünal and Ergün Olgun may better be able to talk about that. But I mean, historically, has been great enmity between Russia and Turkey. And I don't think, Brooks, you should ignore the confessional links with the Greek Cypriots, which are very strong, the sort of cultural links, and critically, the financial links.
Yeah, which are huge. I understand that. I understand that.
I mean, really, enormous.
Okay, well, I think.
May I just add a few things about the Russian connection, okay. Russian dimension?
Sure. My next question is going to go to Ergün Olgun, but before I get to you with my question, and you can come in with your response to Jack Straw at that time, I want to turn to Professor Ünal, who I'm sure has a couple of points to make on what Jack Straw has said.
Okay.
Over to you, Professor Ünal.
Oh, hello. Right. Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation by the organizers. It's been a wonderful basic organization, and it's nice to hear all these new views on the Cyprus question. Just on the Russia dimension, I just wanted to add, well, it's not just a friendship between between Erdogan and Putin, but it's a new type of relationship which is basically flourishing between Turkey and Russia, and both nations are benefiting to a huge extent. There's huge tourism, enormous trade developing, economic links, and the Turkish construction companies are doing wonders across Russia and all that. So that's one dimension. And the other dimension is gradually the two countries are coming around to cooperate over a number of political issues. They have divergences, but they are also beginning to realize that their interests are convergent on a number of issues. I would just say, but for the Turkish-Russian rapprochement, Azerbaijan could not have scored such a quick victory over Armenia, because Russia would have been terribly hostile to that. But the Russians, certainly, when they made that final assessment, if you like, they had to take Turkish factor into account quite importantly, because they need Turkey. The other thing is, despite the history and all the confessional links and what have you, Russia-Greek relations are certainly going through difficult times. The Russians are not happy with the Greeks, both the mainlanders and the Greeks in Cyprus, because the Greeks in Cyprus are opening up, giving bases to French, to others. Yes, true, there are all these links there, but no one can actually predict what might happen between Russia and the Greeks. So the relations seem to be taking a sharp turn, perhaps for the worse, between them.
Okay, I don't want to. That's very helpful, and don't want to stray too much into geopolitics too much, and keep focused on northern Cyprus. But I appreciated the insights you gave there. I want to turn to Ergün Olgun, and you can also feel free to respond to what Jack Straw or Professor Ünal have said. But my question to you is, what can we hope for from the Geneva summit?
Well, thank you for this. Just a few comments about what Jack has said. I mean, the key reason for the failure of the BBF, that's the bicommunal, bizonal federal settlement model for Cyprus, is the Greek Cypriot obsession that Cyprus is Greek, Cyprus is Hellenic. And this naturally nullifies any hope and any possibility of a federal settlement in Cyprus, because it's a direct opposite of power sharing. If you want to dominate an island, that's the exact opposite of federalism. And this is the reason why President Tatar has chosen to go for a two-state solution, naturally open for cooperation with Greek Cypriots. I think we need to add to the Turkish Cypriot perception that their vision is a sort of based on the two states of the island, to still talk to the Greek Cypriots about the possibility of cooperating on the island. This is a small island, and naturally Turkish Cypriots don't want to be on a permanent basis in a confrontative relationship with Greek Cypriots. So basically, that is the overall vision, which I wanted to add to what Jack has said. Now, the reason for the sustenance of the status quo, the unacceptable status quo, is because many countries are happy with the status quo. Naturally, the most happy country or group is the European Union. What reason can we think of for the European Union to want to achieve, to support a two-state settlement in Cyprus? I mean, there is a principle of solidarity in the European Union. I mean, the European Union will be the last country in the world to support a two-state solution, I think. Naturally, there has to be inducement on the international community to accept a two-state solution on the island. I don't see this happening, to be honest. But as Jack has said, I think this is going to come through default. It's not going to be the result of any negotiation with anybody. I don't think it's going to come from any external source unless they are very much hurt with what's happening in Cyprus or in the region. And there are signals that this may be happening. I mean, for example, on the hydrocarbons issue, we've had difficulties in the Eastern Mediterranean. And I've seen, I mean, even the NATO alliance has been challenged because of the conflict between Greece and Turkey regarding the hydrocarbons. So these could be the reasons why people might be interested because of instability in the Eastern Mediterranean to try to facilitate some kind of settlement, which needs to be on a two-state basis, a cooperative relationship, because Turkish Cypriots will not feel politically safe in the hands of the Greek Cypriots with their overarching vision to dominate the island. So that's sort of a brief comment about Jack's comments. Now, coming back to what we can hope for from the Geneva summit, the purpose of this summit, in the words of the Secretary General, is to determine whether common ground exists for the parties to negotiate a lasting solution to the Cyprus problem within a foreseeable future. Now, that is, the objective is to see, it's an acceptance that there is no common ground, and the purpose is to try to see whether common ground exists. Now, I do not see with such divergent views coming in, with the Turkish Cypriots saying that the common ground can be an acceptance by the Greek Cypriots that the Turkish Cypriot side and the Greek Cypriot side are sovereign equals and have equal international status. This would be the foundation on which we can build that future cooperative relationship. The Greek Cypriots' vision is that Turkish Cypriots can be a protected minority. They may not be saying this, but this is what they're aiming at in the usurped Republic of Cyprus. I mean, they want to patch the Turkish Cypriots into the usurped Republic of Cyprus. This is anathema for Turkish Cypriots. So basically, the views are very divergent. So what can the Secretary General do, and what can we hope from the Geneva conference is the Secretary General in the plenary session and in the bilaterals he's going to conduct, he will try to find some common ground, and he will probably be faced with three possibilities ahead of him. He may succeed to convince the two sides that they're inherently sovereign equals and that they inherently have equal international status because they're signatories to the treaties. The two sides are the sources of sovereignty for the island, therefore they are sovereign equals. So he may be able, I have doubts about this, but if he can strike some common ground on this basis, that's the first possibility. The second possibility is that if he cannot find common ground, he may say that let us do another attempt. Let us do another unofficial meeting where you can reflect what has happened at this Geneva meeting, and maybe in about a month's time we come together again, and maybe this time you may be able to find some common ground. So this could be the second option that he will face. The third option is for him to say, sorry guys, we have come to the end of the road. Sorry, I don't see any kind of convergence. I'm going to report back to the Security Council and hand my mission of good offices back to them. So these are the, I think that broadly, these are the three possibilities we can see. Personally, I see a better chance in the second one, whereby the Secretary General says, okay, we have not been able to find any common ground this time, but let us make another attempt in about a month's time. So basically, how do we hope to end up from the Geneva conference? I do not see the chances of achieving common ground, but there may be a possibility that the Secretary Generals will say, let's do it again.
Thank you. Thank you for that. You know, relating to the summit, my next question, I guess, is to David Amess. Do you think that the EU can be a helpful participant to either or both parties? And if not, you know, is there a specific role maybe the UK can play with either or both participants?
Yeah, Brooks, are we still following your opening strictures, 2 or 3 minutes reply, or
if possible?
Okay.
But I appreciate other people have strayed, but
all right, because I mean there are many things I'd like to say, but if you want me to strictly
no, but if you can have 4 or 5 minutes if you need it, but yeah.
Okay, well look, you've got me on this webinar, Brooks, and well done you and your colleagues organising it. As a member of the British Parliament, I've been around for a long time. I mean, I'm now my 4th decade. Now of the 650 MPs, I'm now the 7th longest serving. And from the moment I was first elected, I was faced with the Cyprus problem. And here I am nearly 40 years later, listening to the 3 people on the webinar, and we seem to be going round and round and round in circles, but perhaps we'll touch on a possible solution. I just want it settled. Greece, wonderful country. Turkey, a wonderful country. And it's crazy that the beautiful island of Cyprus is divided. Now, as you know, Brooks, I was never very keen on the UK's membership of the European Union, and I'm rather glad we've left. However, I do think that the European Union can be a helpful participant with both parties in the upcoming talks. Offshore oil and gas deposits in the Eastern Mediterranean are important factors in considering a deal and need to be shared fairly. The European Union, however, and I think this is sort of what Jack was alluding to, because it's absolutely balmy that they admitted the Greek side as a member and not the Turkish side. I mean, it's just a terrible mistake. And the European Union will have to remain unbiased in the negotiations, considering Greece is a member state and Turkey isn't. The European Union could be useful if it is impartial and working closely with the United Nations. And finally, hopefully the European Union and the United Nations can mediate the negotiations and the 2 sides can come to an agreement, be it 2 separate states living peacefully side by side or 1 state combining both the Turkish and the Greek Cypriots. Blackmailing Turkey, however, with sanctions will serve absolutely no purpose whatsoever, other than yet again we will have another stalemate.
Yeah, but I actually want to push you on this, because you know, the point that I think Ergün Olgun made earlier is the fact that the political reality of the EU is that they will side with Turkey. I'm sorry, with Greece. They have no incentive to be reasonable in this. They have no incentive to be balanced at all. They are always going to take the Greek position in this. So I'm not really sure how the EU, the realpolitik of this, is going to lead to an EU that takes a balanced approach on this. And maybe Ergün Olgun wants to sort of support me on that particular thesis, given I'm
Well, you've spoiled my answer, Brooks. I was trying to be nice to the European Union.
Don't.
You're basically saying that they're
realpolitik.
biased. Well, look, let's test them on this. Let's see how impartial that they can be. I mean, those who are pro-European on this call might say, well, hang on, David wanted us to leave the European Union. We haven't got any influence now there. I think we have. But look, the bottom line to all this, Brooks, I'm going to say this in front of Jack. Since I've been an MP, when Margaret Thatcher and George Vassiliou was in charge on the Cyprus side, I really thought we were going to get some sort of arrangement, and I thought we were close to it. When, dare I say, the beloved John Prescott was the deputy prime minister and the wonderful Baroness Boothroyd were absolutely involved in this situation, I thought that Labour were going to sort this out, but it just hasn't happened. And the European Union, of course, has been constant throughout. So I just feel, Brooks, that we need world leaders of substance to speak out on this issue, take a real interest in it, which they don't seem to be at the moment, and then perhaps put pressure on the European Union to be honest brokers. But of course, Brooks, you are right what you're saying, that they start from a biased angle, but we live in hope.
Yeah, okay. We have 60 seconds because I have so many more questions, Ergün. So go ahead, but quickly.
Quickly, okay. I see no chance in the European Union being an impartial body trying to help the process here in Cyprus, because it has two members in the European Union, the Greek Cypriots and Greece, who will certainly veto anything that will happen in the direction of bringing in equilibrium to the equation. The latest statements coming in from the European Union are that we are giving Turkey 3 months to see whether they will stop challenging the European Union, which means Greece and the Greek Cypriots. That is the kind of outlook. I mean, if the European Union would have been interested in settling or in helping or being impartial, it would have said, in 3 months' time, we will see how we can balance the interest, let's say the legitimate interests of Turkey and the legitimate interests of the European Union in trying to resolve the issues of the Eastern Mediterranean. But that's not what they say. They say we will see whether Turkey will stop challenging us. I mean, that is the kind of outlook. I do not see it happening, definitely not. The European Union cannot be an impartial player, and we have objected to them taking part in the Geneva conference. So they will not be coming there as an observer.
Okay.
I'll stop here.
Okay, I appreciate, Professor Ünal, you have a question, but I'm going to go to Lord Northbrook first. Then my next question is to you. And then if you want to come back on that, you can come back at that time, okay?
All right.
Okay, Lord Northbrook, as we discussed in our last webinar, the Republic of Cyprus is going to close the border to the TRNC to non-EU passport holders. There is a perception that this is being deliberately done to put pressure on the North. Do you agree that the time has now come to reinstate touchdown-only flights via Turkey to the TRNC?
Thank you, Brooks. Could I firstly just add to what previous speakers have said? I totally agree the European Union won't be particularly keen on helping the TRNC, especially as Turkey's chances of joining the EU seem to be getting no better. Secondly, I'd just like to add to previous efforts at the peace talks that President Akunci made huge efforts to get the bizonal, bifederal answer, but actually that failed. And in fact, I think Turkey were not very keen for him to be re-elected because they felt he'd given away too much. On Geneva, I'd just like to quickly say that I can see the Greek side making helpful noises, and a cynical view, maybe they're very happy just to keep the talks going without a timetable, as they've been doing for many years. To answer those basically two questions I've got, Brooks. Firstly, I think looking objectively, the border between the two is being closed by both sides due to the coronavirus outbreak. But the danger is that the Greek side could use this as an excuse to make this more permanent. And it is a big worry and the UK clearly needs to make a strong protest if there are signs after coronavirus of this closure being permanent. The second issue in the question is the problem with the touchdown flights. I think probably most people are familiar, but as I understand it, certainly when I first went to Northern Cyprus before 2017, Turkish Airlines, you did actually have to go via Istanbul and then change, but then Pegasus actually was still able to touch down. But there's a bit of a murky situation here, and the UK Department of Transport, I'm afraid, are in the middle of it. It was introduced as a requirement by the UK in 2017, and as a letter from the Department of Transport to Pegasus, strongly suggesting that this procedure should take place. But when the Transport Secretary was asked about this, they said that Pegasus had made the decision themselves. Well, that might have been the case, but certainly there was a lot of pressure from the UK and particularly the British ambassador in Turkey. The situation is that also not only has it taken place returning from Ergün airport to the UK, but Turkey seemed to be also insisting that Pegasus do that on the way out, and I'm not quite sure why that is. There's a problem, as everybody probably knows, of the status of Ergün airport. But I continue to believe that efforts should be made to reinstate touchdown, if possible.
My next question is actually to Professor Ünal. In fact, there are two questions. How firmly is Turkey committed to a two-state solution? And despite declaring the TRNC in 1983, Turkish Cypriots haven't actively pursued recognition of their state until now. Why is that? And what challenges do they face?
Well, I couldn't hear the first part of your question. The second part I did.
Well, the first part is, how firmly is Turkey committed to a two-state solution?
Well, I think Turkey, by all appearance, seems to be committed to a two-state solution now, and quite firmly, because the circumstances, basically the present conditions have made it, have made any other solution almost impossible, as Ergün, Olgun and other speakers have pointed out. Basically, it's been quite clear from a cursory look at what has happened in the Cyprus question, basically, since the negotiations began. You can take it either from 1974 or early, or from 1983, from the declaration of the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. Basically, it is almost impossible to form a federation with the Greeks on the basis of a, bizonal, bicommunal, and on the basis of on the basis of political equality and what have you. Now, what happened with the present government in Ankara, presumably, is that they came in power with completely different views about Cyprus question and the whole conduct of the Turkish foreign policy. And they thought that all these issues could be dealt with in some way or the other, but it was just certain people and the certain groups who are both in Cyprus and in Turkey, foot dragging. But then after a while, they began to realize that that wasn't the case. For instance, President Erdogan is on record as saying on more than one occasion that he had been promised by several high-ranking representatives of the Western world about Cyprus, about this or the other, but no promise has ever been kept. So they kept back to him asking for one concession or the other kind of thing. And in the end, basically it backfired. So what we have had over the last 20 years or so is Turkey basically pursued pro-European Union policies that certainly determined Turkey's also policy towards the Cyprus question. And that was one. And the other is that during this period, basically all the pro-European Union solution proposals have been exhausted. So, for instance, Mr. Denktaş was always presented as the Mr. No, but he went and some very pro-solution people took over from him, and they negotiated with the Greeks, and the upshot is almost nowhere. So basically all these, and particularly the way the Greek Cypriots have been acting in Eastern Mediterranean with regard to the continental shelf and the exclusive economic zone, with no respect to Turkey's own rights in the region, trying to exclude Turkey, basically all that contributed to the formulation of this new policy. And one other thing maybe is the multipolar world order, which is basically in clear shape now, is also one of the inducements basically about the formulation of this policy. In a multipolar world order, a country, a middle-sized country, like Britain, for instance, Britain may be at the top of the, say, medium-sized countries league, but Turkey would also have its rightful place, perhaps somewhere in the middle. We would play soccer together with Britain. Britain also has certain other basically advantages as the permanent member of the United Nations or so forth. What I'm saying, all these factors came together to shape Turkey's new policy. And in this new, the other thing is the Greek vision. Basically, the Greek Cypriots, and Cyprus is not the only dispute between Turkey and Greece. There is also the Aegean. And about the Aegean, again, we are confronted with Greece's maximalist demands and policies. And just one short note on the EU, I do agree with the previous speakers that the EU's position and the EU as in general is a non-starter in any Turco-Greek negotiations if we basically expect to bring about a kind of solution to the problems. We've seen it over Cyprus. We've seen it also over the Aegean. The way they basically approach to the question, for instance, on the Aegean, is that they just interpret the Greek position into the EU position and then demand Turkey does not do this or does do that. Well, it's a non-started position. It can't work with Turkey. So, there's also one thing I would like to remind our panelists. For instance, on the question of Macedonia, again, the Greeks basically made a lot of fuss about the recognition of Macedonia by the European Union. Remember how the European Union finally got frustrated because it got nowhere in the recognition of Macedonia, and finally it referred the question to the Security Council. So you get that Greek foot dragging, and in that, what I would suggest, a country like Britain, which is now out of the European Union, could actually play a very constructive role. Am I within my limits?
That neatly brings me to Jack Straw again then. Given your position as an ex-foreign secretary, you know, what advice would you give Dominic Raab, the current Foreign Secretary? I guess is my first question. You know, is there a constructive role perhaps Britain can play in this going forward? And do you think there are other senior politicians in the UK who perhaps share your view, but perhaps are in fear of being attacked if they make them public?
Well, the advice I'd give to Dominic Raab is first of all to offer him the analysis which I and everybody else has been offering this evening, which is that the previous desired solution for a bizonal, bifederal, single unitary state, which is essentially what was in the 1960 constitution, can't work, and that the Turkish Cypriots have tried to secure agreement around that, most famously at Bergenstock and in the referendum that followed. But increasingly, the Greek Cypriots don't have an interest in it. And I also accept what Dr. Olgun said, which is that there is a Hellenistic obsession about Cyprus should be formally part of Greece. So they see any sharing of power as or indeed loss of territory as a loss to their sense of Greece. But the first thing to do is we have to get established in the minds of British politicians, and not least the current Foreign Secretary, that if they want a solution, the solution is going to have to be a two-state solution. I mean, after all, let's say that British government has accepted that plenty of other places in the world, including in multi-state solution in the Balkans, as a single state. When I came into the British House of Commons and when David did, it isn't now. And it's been a sensible thing to do so far as the Middle East is concerned. And we're all signed up to a two-state solution. And I also to make the point that if you have a two-state solution, it's much easier for these two communities to live normally with each other. It doesn't remotely follow that just because they've got a technical border, they have to have armed guards there any more than us outside the European Union means that we have barbed wire around us and no one's allowed into France. Of course not. I mean, COVID aside, there is, Brooks, I'd also seek to persuade Dominic Raab, I mean, this is now slightly fanciful, but to persuade the British government and British members of Parliament on both sides that we ought to be working towards a two-state solution. Now, Britain has formally got a significant role because we're one of the treaty signatories for Cyprus's independence. So we're a signatory state, and we need to use that influence more. Whether, I mean, there's then a tactical issue. I know everybody knows my views, although let me say that they were, when I started as Foreign Secretary, I didn't have these views. They were born out of seeing how the Greek Cypriots behaved. But it would probably be wise for the British Foreign Secretary to keep his tinder dry on this, but to know where they wanted to move. And they've also have to have a lot of thought about the what they do about, I mean, they've got to keep the sovereign bases for all sorts of reasons. I mean, one of the things that any sensible British government here should do is to try and get the United States on side. I mean, I agree with Dr. Olgun and Professor Ünal. Forget about the European Union. The European Union, for all that it's got the paraphernalia of a foreign policy, and expensive ambassadors and all that, in bilateral ambassadors, it doesn't operate a foreign policy except in certain very limited spheres where France and Germany, and in the old days, the UK, have a common interest, for example, over Iran, where it's, but that was really a trilateral policy. On other stuff, they just default to the lowest common denominator. And if one member state feels very strongly about it, the view of the other member states is, well, why the devil should we argue about this. The United States, on the other hand, is in a really significant position. It needs Turkey more than it needs Greece for so many reasons, and strategically, in terms of the economy and so on. Its pivotal position within the Middle East. And Greece is a lovely place. It's got far fewer people in it, and it is far less influential. So work needs to be done in the White House, in the State Department, and on the Hill as well, because be in no doubt about the extent of lobbying by the Greeks and Greek Cypriot interests. And of course, there are a lot of Greeks in constituencies, in congressional districts, who are influential. Now, there are some Turks as well, but that's also true here. I mean, that's just a factor. And some MPs are able to live with that, and others find it difficult. But so the British government, the short answer, or a slightly longer answer, the British government needs to accept in their mind that the two-state solution is the only solution, and then work out how to get there and which allies to try and persuade on the way.
Yeah, I mean, just as an outside observation on my side, but the reality of the new Secretary of State under Biden is that he's a very strong Europhile. He's sort of not, I wouldn't say a stronger proponent of a strong relationship necessarily with Turkey. His default, my instinct is to take more of the European line, if not the Greek line, is my view of him.
Well, I mean,
as a fellow Harvard graduate who I've known before. So that's just my understanding of his personality. But I want to push you on one other point though. We've talked about Dominic Raab and the government, but the Labour Party's default position, going back to Jeremy Corbyn's time, is very much taking the Greek and Greek Cypriot line. Do you see any change in the fault lines in the Labour Party's position on this particular issue? Well,
I'm very happy. I haven't discussed it with Lisa Nandy, but I'm very happy to do so. And her colleagues in her team, with whom I'm in close touch. My guess is, I don't ever remember Jeremy Corbyn ever asking me a question when I was Foreign Secretary about Cyprus, but my guess is, because he's a very impressionable guy and basically very weak, so he responded to pressure within his own constituency. My guess is that the group of Greek Cypriots, perfectly well-meaning Greek Cypriots, who have shouted loudly at him over the years, and so he's bought into that position. I don't think he would have thought any further than that, because deep thinking is not his greatest characteristic. But we've now got we're sort of a new management in the Labour Party. Corbyn was an aberration. It helped people like David, but deeply damaged the left in Britain. But there you are. Anyway, he's gone.
Yeah, no. I mean, I do think, if nothing else, I do think, just as an aside, it would be helpful, given your experience, a long-term experience on this issue, would be perhaps to have a chat with Lisa Nandy and to get her to at least think about this issue.
More and she's very open-minded, and so are people on her team, like Wayne David, who covers the Middle East. I mean, the other significant. I mean, she's tough anyway. She's capable of thinking for herself, regardless of pressure inside her constituency. But as it happens, I think the number of people of either Greek or Greek Cypriot or Turkish Cypriot origin within Wigan is pretty small.
Yeah.
So she hadn't got to worry about that.
Yeah, great. Okay, my next question is to Ergün Olgun. Is what do you see currently as the mood of the Turkish Cypriot people in the run-up to the Geneva summit?
let me just add up to what Jack has been saying first before I go to that question. I mean, I agree with Jack's analysis, but I would like to add to it in the following sort of context. First of all, I mean, I just read Global Britain's sort of outlook, and I see that there they see China and Russia as the challenge to Britain and of course to the Western Alliance. Now, it happens that the Cyprus issue is in fact challenging, currently undermining the Western Alliance's pillars. It is sort of reducing or undermining the solidarity needed in the NATO alliance, because it is bringing in conflict Greece and Turkey linked to the Cyprus issue. It is also undermining Turkey-EU relations, and we need to peg Turkey firmly in the Western Alliance and in the European Union, if you ask me. And it is undermining the chances of monetizing the hydrocarbon resources in the Eastern Mediterranean. Therefore, we need to resolve the Cyprus issue. The question is, how can we sustainably resolve the Cyprus issue? Not a quick fix like 1960, but something that will be sustainable. And I fully agree with Jack that this can only be done on the basis of two states, because otherwise we are going to have a sort of another scenario like 1963, when the Greek Cypriots will again try to dominate the island. If the Turkish Cypriots are not in their state on sovereign equality with their own borders, and they feel safe and secure, and the Greek Cypriots will not dare enter their territory. So basically the two-state solution is to the interests, I agree with Jack, of the Western Alliance. Therefore, we need the support of Britain, we need the support of the United States, if they really want more solidarity in the eastern flank of NATO and of the Western Alliance. So this is very critical. And we already have two states on the island. I mean, neither side in Cyprus is going to accept to be subordinate to the other. I mean, the states are there. I mean, they're already functioning. We cannot change it. So what are the threats I mean, the continuation of the current status quo? I don't think it's going to serve anybody's interests. First of all, if the Turkish Cypriots continue to be under isolation from the Greek Cypriots and from the rest of the world, Turkish Cypriots' dependence on Turkey is going to increase. Do Greek Cypriots like this? I don't think they do. This is what they've been telling us. So basically, to the Greek Cypriots' interests, I mean, opening up tourism to Greek Cypriot, tourism facilities in the southern part of the island, shipping facilities for Greek shipping companies, more security for them because there would have been an agreement in Cyprus. I mean, all these things will be returned to the Greek Cypriots, and it will also help the Western Alliance. So basically, a two-state solution in Cyprus is the answer to the dilemma in Cyprus. I think there is enough reason to start backing this from this point on. Now, coming back to the mood, if you like, of the Turkish Cypriots now on the island, I mean, I will give you certain statistics. There is little expectation that anything is going to happen through negotiation with Greek Cypriots. This is out of the question. There is need for the international community, for external actors like Britain, to introduce conditionality in the Cyprus issue. Like, for example, on hydrocarbons. The hydrocarbons in the region are co-owned. You cannot impose restrictions on the Turkish Cypriots and allow the Greek Cypriots to operate on their own. There has to be conditionality on the exploitation of hydrocarbons. Resolve your issue and you can then exploit the resources. Should be the position to be followed from this point on. You cannot bind the hands of the Turkish Cypriots, allow everything for Greek Cypriots, and then you expect a solution. It's not going to come. Therefore, conditionality is important. Britain can play a significant role. Britain is now not part of the European Union. I think following Brexit, there are more chances for for Britain to act as a guarantor power and as the country which has obligations under international treaties not to allow any one side in Cyprus to exercise its authority over the other. Therefore, in terms of flights to Cyprus, in terms of disembarkation earlier on, Lord Northbrook was talking about this. I think there are significant opportunities for Britain to start direct trade with Turkish Cypriots and direct flights. So basically, the future lies in this: reintegrate Turkish Cypriots into Britain and into the Western Alliance, and allow Turkey's problems to be resolved so that it will not look towards Russia and will look towards the Western Alliance, basically. So all these issues in a strategic context, geostrategic context, are the things that we need to look into. As far as Turkish Cypriots' mood is concerned, I will give you a few statistics regarding this. A survey done by a Greek Cypriot, a Turkish Cypriot, and also Natalie Tocci, who's now an advisor to the European Union, a significant academic. Their survey in 2009 disclosed that 80% of Greek Cypriots prefer a unitary state, and 71% of Turkish Cypriots prefer a two-state solution. In the following year, in 2010, another survey said, Interpeace, this was done by an international company, they found out that 92% of Greek Cypriots prefer a unitary state and 90% of Turkish Cypriots. This month, a survey was done by the German Friedrich Ebert Stiftung Foundation, and they found out that Turkish Cypriots' preference is not federalism. So if you do not prefer federalism, and federalism is based on need, if you don't have a pressing need to join forces, it's like partnerships. You need you go into partnerships if you need a partner. The Greek Cypriots do not need the Turkish Cypriots as a partner. They see Turkish Cypriots as an obligation. Therefore, there is no room for federalism in Cyprus, and Turkish Cypriots are aware of this now. Basically, President Tatar, in his election campaign, particularly following the failure of both Mehmet Ali Talat, who were strong supporters of federalism, following the failure of Mustafa Akıncı in Grand Montana in 2017, he said, and his party said, there is no hope in federalism. We have to go for two states. And let us start finding the foundation of this. Currently, the Turkish Cypriot mood is that federalism by a strong majority is out of the question for Cyprus. It is not feasible. It is not sustainable. Therefore, two-state solution is the best. That's the mood of Turkish Cypriots. They don't expect anything from the Grand Montana talks, from the Geneva talks, to be honest, because of this discrepancy. But there is now an obligation on the Western Alliance to make sure that we do not break up the solidarity of the Western Alliance any further by distancing Turkey further, but addressing the Cyprus issue so that we can link up with the alliance. So that's sort of an overall capture of the Turkish Cypriot mood now.
Thank you for that. Okay, before we open up to the audience, I've got, I guess, two final questions. One for David Amess and one for Lord Northbrook. The first to David, and if you could be reasonably brief in your responses. To David, is it time for the UK to end its embargo on Turkish Cypriots in Northern Cyprus? The answer is yes. Why?
Well, look, I think Boris Johnson obviously has close ties to Turkey. So, yes, I think it is about time. You wanted a quick answer, yeah.
Right. Okay. Lord Northbrook, if you're, I can't see you, but I'm hoping you're still there. The sort of final question for you is, for a solution, both sides must be ready to make some painful concessions and compromises. What do you feel the Greek Cypriots could compromise on, and what do you feel the Turkish Cypriots could compromise on?
Thank you, Brooks. First, I'd just like to tidy up on a couple of things very quickly. Actually, Joe Biden visited Cyprus in 2015 first US president to go there since 1962 and stayed there for 3 days and went to the north. So there's certainly interest in Cyprus historically by him, but I think it's more for energy, looking at the energy situation there. Secondly, our UK Foreign Office, they seemed, when I last saw them a year or so ago as a co-chair of our parliamentary group, they seemed to have only one answer to the situation, a bizonal, bifederal answer. And when asked what their plan B was, they didn't seem to have one. So that's not very encouraging. And we've been trying to meet them for 3 months, but we've not been able to get a meeting sorted out. Very quickly, because I could take the rest of the seminar on this very interesting question.
Yeah, I know. Sorry about that.
Very quickly, it seemed to me Turkey seemed to be making all the concessions at the Crans-Montana talks, and issues, the Greek side seemed to move goalposts, like bringing up the guarantee power situation, which didn't seem to be even involved in the Annan negotiations. And very quickly, the sectors of territorial claims, territorial concessions, property claims, federal power sharing arrangements, but not applicable if there's a two-state solution, security guarantee arrangements, ongoing rights and responsibilities of the three guarantor powers, economic matters, Turkish settlers, and EU relations.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, so now we're opening up to the audience. I mean, I'll start with one of the panelists, but any of the other panelists who wish to give their views on this, please feel free to raise your hand to me. I'm going to start with perhaps Professor Ünal. You know, the question from Fari is, how will a two-state solution benefit both the Turkish and Greek Cypriots in Cyprus?
Well, a two-state solution would certainly stabilize the region. For instance, I'm also quite involved with Northern Cyprus in the sense that I go there every 2 weeks to teach, or until the pandemic, I used to fly every fortnight to go and spend a few days to do my 2 weeks teaching and all that. So basically, on the question of the mood of the people in Northern Cyprus, I can say from the driver who picks me up and takes me to the hotel, and then people in the hotel, the shopkeepers and the pharmacy owner, and the North Cyprus elite, you get this frustration with the ongoing negotiations. And they keep saying, well, you know, we don't want these negotiations, because each round of negotiations would be presented to the people as the last chance to find a solution to the Cyprus problem. And if you think about somebody in his 30s, in her 30s, then that somebody basically saw and heard this say about few times at least, and nothing came out of it. So on that basis, they are totally, how shall I say, frustrated with that situation, and they think that the Greek side in Cyprus is insatiable, is unsatisfiable, and there are actually totally divergent positions. The other thing, because I also follow Greek politics in the mainland, and my view is that they basically gave up Megali idea, the great idea, but they somewhat formed a Mikri idea. The Mikri idea contains basically the Aegean, keeping Turkey out of the Aegean, keeping Turkey much of the Eastern Mediterranean, and then ownership of Cyprus under a fully fledged nation state run by the Greeks. So in that sense, the way it would basically help the Turkish Cypriots, a two-state solution would be, basically it would give them a prospect And well, look, this is where your future lies. In Northern Cyprus, for instance, in certain parts, people don't bury their dead where they live because they think these areas might be transferred as part of a negotiation, as part of a deal they might strike at some stage. So they do their burials somewhere near Nicosia or somewhere near Turkey, in Kyrenia and what have you. So this is no good on psycho. It would certainly boost their psychology, and in terms of foreign investment, even Turkish investment would flow much more than it has flown by now. In the case of Turkey, well, if you basically make friends with the Greeks and basically stabilize your relations with both mainland Greece as well as Greek Cypriots, you would reduce your military expenditure on the western part of the country. And second, you would turn the whole of the Aegean into a sea of peace. You would do joint ventures with the Greeks and all that. And on the basis of the benefits that would accrue out of a solution of this sort to the Greeks in Cyprus, for instance, as Ergün Olgun has actually pointed out, they are, I think, beginning to understand, as I follow their newspapers and magazines, they are beginning to realize that without a solution with Turkey and without a solution to the Cyprus problem, they can't basically exploit the natural resources and the hydrocarbons all around Cyprus.
Okay.
So and on the business of shipping, transport, and what have you, there is plenty of things that the Greek Cypriots would also benefit from, a solution of a two-state in Cyprus.
Thank you for that. Okay, we've got 54 questions in the hopper at the moment, so if we can
My
be a
God.
little briefer on the answers. If anybody wants to particularly come in on this question, raise your hand, but otherwise I'm going to Jack Straw. There's a question from Hatice, who says, as coordinator of the Association of Turkish Cypriots Abroad, I would like to ask Jack Straw, why didn't he express these views when he was in power? That's the first question. And the second question is, now that the UK is no longer a member of the EU, what can the UK do to end the isolation on the Turkish Cypriots in all areas, for example, trade, communication, and sport? And can Jack help promote this?
My views shifted as a result of my experience as Foreign Secretary. I became more and more angry when I was Foreign Minister and expressed that Foreign Minister with the behavior, particularly of President Papadopoulos and his Foreign Minister. And just so this gentleman knows, when I subsequently went to Cyprus, both to north and south, I was warmly received in the north, but went to the south. Papadopoulos refused to receive me. I told you, I mean, a dreadful man in my view. So that's the background. And then during my period, I then moved, and let me say, Joska Fischer and I were instrumental in getting a very good resolution through the Foreign Ministers' Council, the General Affairs Council, in April 2004, about opening things up to the north because of the behavior of the Greek Cypriots. The tragedy is that it wasn't followed through. It's all there about what we should have been doing for the north, and I was, as I say, instrumental with Joska in gaining that agreement. Well, I then moved on to do domestic jobs in the British government, but as soon as, as it were, I was free to take a different view, I did so, and I was vocal about this between 2010 and 2015, which is my last 5 years in the House of Commons, as I have been since. Now, there was a second question. second part of the question.
Yeah, which is now that the UK is no longer a member of the EU, what can the UK do to end the isolation on Turkish Cypriots in all areas, including trade, communication, and sport?
Well, actually, yeah, sorry. I mean, a good deal is, in my view, because I mean, I got very close to get to opening up direct flights to the north, and the Foreign Office lawyers were good, but they were piling me in with all sorts of treaty obligations and all the rest of it. We could even have done it at that stage. It wouldn't have broken any European Union obligation, but we could certainly open up direct flights. It would be very, very popular with all the Brits who go and have their holidays in northern Cyprus. So that's one thing, and there would be muttering from the European Union, but in the end, the EU is a paper tiger. And I mean, I did vote to remain, but any of us who did vote for remain, well, given the way the European Union has behaved over COVID vaccinations, would have an extraordinarily difficult time making a case for it now. And if you read the press in major capitals within Europe, they're all in despair about this extraordinary bureaucracy of the European Commission, which has sort of imploded under Ursula von der Leyen. So actually, now there's an opportunity here. Now is the moment, because the European Union's got plenty else on its plate. What's it going to do if we have direct flights? Getting direct flights in is actually pretty critical, because then it is about normalization, and then we can.
Yeah, and I think symbolically is also incredibly important.
Yeah, no, it is, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I think Lord Northbrook would like to make a point on this.
I'd just like to make the point that I don't see why we can't do as we do with Taiwan, to have a trading office actually in the north. And by the way, we have direct flights to Taiwan, even though we don't recognize them diplomatically.
That's a really good point. And
yeah.
As everybody knows, the trade representative for Taiwan is effectively an ambassador.
Right. That's a very, very good idea. Okay, I think Ergün Olgun wants to come in quickly, but then I've got another question I'd like to fire from the audience. Quickly, Ergün.
Simply to say that, I mean, there are no restrictions on direct flights to North Cyprus. Turkey is flying direct. Turkish Airlines is flying direct to Ergün, and there are nothing happens to Turkish Airlines. So why not other airlines?
Yeah. Okay. The next question is from Martin Bruton. Could the UK, or indeed any other country, unilaterally recognize the TRNC, and what would happen if they did? Which of our panelists would like to take that one on? Ergün, you go ahead on this.
I mean, recognition is a political choice. The Republic of Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus fulfills all of the conditions set in the Montevideo Convention, whereby there are 4 conditions. You have to have territory, which the TRNC has. You have to have population, which the TRNC has. You have to have an effective government, which the TRNC has, and you have to have the ability to have international connections and international arrangements, which the TRNC has. So basically, the TRNC fulfills all of the conditions for a state. What it needs is recognition, and recognition is a political choice. Nothing can stop it, and it's free. I mean, you know that in the case of Kosovo, international courts said that you cannot stop the declaration of independence of any country, any state, or any situation which fulfills these 4 conditions can declare itself as an independent state, which the TRNC has. I think there is no limitation on Britain to recognize the TRNC.
Yeah, I think the Taiwanese would have a good debate with you on that one in terms of the practicalities of that. Does anybody else want to take on this question from the audience? David.
Yeah, Brooks, it's just not going to happen. And I really wanted to say earlier, when I first became an MP, every week we seemed to have a debate about Cyprus. And what happened, the two sides of the argument would touch base with newly elected MPs, take them over to Cyprus, to both sides, explain the situation to them. Now, I was initially seduced by the Greek side. I didn't have any constituency interests really in terms of the constituency I represented then at Basildon. In fact, most of my supporters were on the Turkish side. And then, of course, as time has gone on, I bet more and more people on the Turkish side. What I really wanted to say to all the people on this call, because you've got a lot of participants here, Brooks, is that there are a huge number of new members of Parliament. They don't know the first thing about Cyprus. I mean, none of us are really experts. They wouldn't have a clue about the Green Line, and we were talking about the two-state solution earlier. What would happen about Famagusta? And really, there needs to be a connection with members of Parliament again. It's seldom discussed.
But if I can interrupt, David, then
yeah,
you know, in order for, you know, the loudest voice historically, and I'm as guilty of this as anybody else when I was a politician, was the Greek Cypriot community. That is the only voice I ever heard during my 10 years as an MP. Surely there's a role for the APPG, you know, on this issue to actually proactively go out there and to start educating MPs with a slightly more balanced approach on this whole issue.
Yeah, Brooks, I know that Jack wants to come in, but look, I don't mind saying it. Ever since the election on the 12th of December 2019, Parliament has been rubbish because of the coronavirus pandemic. And we've got a huge intake of new MPs who haven't really worked in a proper function in Parliament. And now would be the time, as we're easing lockdown, for people to connect with them and not just do it on constituency interest, you know, and Jack put the case well as far as Islington was concerned, but to connect with them and gently, not in an aggressive way, set out the arguments. So to go to the point of the question, unless there is pressure on British members of Parliament to get involved in this issue, nothing is going to happen. They need to be educated and they need to be told about the situation. But I know Jack is desperate to come in.
I was only desperate to say I entirely agree with David, and it is the Greek Cypriots who've been more successful in building up support for this. So I remember when I raised this as a backbencher in 2010 onwards, suddenly out of the woodwork came all these fairly obscure even to me, and I'd been there for 30 years, members of Parliament. But they had been persuaded to be very strong in favour of Greek Cyprus. And they were there. Now, it takes effort, and TRNC is not flush with money, but Turkey is you know, it's a big country. It has overall, in aggregate, a lot of resources. It's got, the work has got to be done, and the Greek Cypriots use very skillful PR agencies, and I'm afraid you have to do that these days. There are plenty of ways. If you happen to have, you know, some constituents in the constituency of a key member of Parliament, say the Foreign Secretary or the Prime Minister, on side, well, okay, we'll exploit that. But otherwise, there are plenty of ways of getting to members of Parliament, getting them to listen and to be briefed. But last point, again, to pick up what David said, the people, the generations, new generation of members of Parliament who are there now, who came in 2019, won't have a clue about what happened in 1960. Many of them, a lot weren't born in 1974, when the Greek fascist colonels tried a coup d'etat on the island of Cyprus, and the members of Parliament won't know at all about the fact that was the trigger for the Turkish troops coming to the rescue of Turkish Cypriots who are going to be massacred and so on. But I mean, I think that if the case is made And people are asked, what are you going to do about this state, which is a state, where people are they fulfill all the criteria for statehood, but they can't be a state. Then they might, one or two of them might start thinking about it. And you don't need, if you've got 10, 20 who are really clear about the issue, you can then start to make progress. But I mean, just again, final point to agree with David. I don't think the British government just out of the blue could suddenly say, we're going to recognise TRNC. It's about getting other countries on board. But what the British government can and should do now is start to act as if TRNC is recognised, picking up the Taiwanese example and, for example, introducing direct flights.
Yeah, and trade. Okay, I think Lord Northbrook wanted to come in as well here.
Yeah, very quickly, Brooks, just to say that as head of the APPG, I wrote to all the new Conservative MPs after the last election, but afraid got a resounding non-response. So I think that's a bit disappointing. But on the other hand, I think that the publicity of the TRNC in London needs to be upgraded considerably because, again, mentioning Taiwan, they are very good at publicising their cause.
Yeah. And one reason why I don't think that there would be, say, huge hostility to making moves, for example, on flights and on other things, is that to the extent there was hostility and Greek Cypriots or Greek Cypriot interests were standing up and saying that Turkish Cyprus has to be isolated, you get the same kind of reaction you do when China starts to try to bully Taiwan. It hasn't helped China at all.
Okay, Professor Ünal, you've got something to say.
Well, just a short note on the possibility of Britain basically coming up to recognize Northern Cyprus straight away. Perhaps it would be a process rather than just a sharp, basically answer to come up and recognize Northern TRNC. It would be a process by which Britain basically would allow direct flights and direct trade, open a trade office in North Cyprus, and establish its some sort of diplomatic relations with, again, TRNC. This would basically put a lot of pressure on the Greeks, because they would then conclude that things have changed and the Western mind is changing. The United States might follow the same lead. And then if Britain basically initiates that, several other countries might even go to the point of recognizing TRNC. And that would put a lot of pressure on the Greek mind that, well, things have changed and they've got to really talk to the Turks, and Turkey accept a two-state solution in Cyprus and come to a sustainable arrangement over the Aegean.
Okay, this is sort of my because time is ticking here and we've got about 5 more minutes. I might spill over a little bit. The sort of penultimate question I've got is from Caroline. And I guess it relates to the strongest man in the room, which is the US. What do the panel think is the most effective way of convincing the US of the benefits of a resolution of the Cyprus dispute to strengthen the NATO alliance? If the US were more receptive to a two-state solution, this must be the best option for resolution of this. Who wants to take this on?
I can.
Okay, Ergün.
Yep.
Ergün, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah. Regarding the previous question, I can say that I think Professor Hasan Ünal is spot on. There is a human rights dimension also to the isolation imposed on Turkish Cypriots, and of course there is an obligation on the UK to respect its treaty obligations regarding Turkish Cypriots and their status. So basically, it could be a process, as Professor Ünal has mentioned. And maybe we could start with direct trade and direct flights and all that to sort of address this deficiency, human rights deficiency in Cyprus, and the obligation deficiency for the United Kingdom. So it would be a good step forward to sort of also give the right messages to the Greek Cypriots that you cannot have your cake and eat it. There are people on this island, and we have to respect their rights as well. So that could be a good starting point. Regarding the US, I agree that particularly faced with the challenges that the US and the Western Alliance is facing, coming from, I mean, the destabilizing effect, the efforts of Russia and the military buildup of China, and we don't know when that's going to be sort of having its impact in our region. I think there is need for the US to make up with Turkey and also address the Cyprus issue because it's having this negative implication on the issues that we talked about, including the NATO alliance. So basically, this could be one element that could help it. The other element could be, I'm not too sure about this second one, but it could be hydrocarbons. There are US companies investing in the region. Of course, the prices of hydrocarbons, natural gas, is not that attractive at this moment in time, but it's potentially there. So it could also be helpful in this relationship. Furthermore, there is the issue of Israel. Israel's exit to the west is through Cyprus. And naturally, we do not want instability in the region. We want stability in the region. I think it would also help if we achieve some kind of settlement that would be sustainable in Cyprus. It could also mean that for Israel as well, we have a stable Eastern Mediterranean devoid of problems that could threaten Israel. So those could be some of the elements that we could talk about.
Okay, we're sort of heading towards the final straight here. If you can be very quick, Professor Ünal.
Well, the only thing I could basically add to what Mr. Olgun has already said is that if we look at the whole problem, because he's stated all the positive elements that would come out of a proper solution to the Cyprus question on the basis of two states and all that, because that would also facilitate a Turco-Greek rapprochement and also agreement over the Aegean too. But let's think about the other way around. So the instability goes on and saber rattling on a daily basis across the Aegean, across the Eastern Mediterranean, and what have you. In this day and age, which is very unstable in terms of world politics, as again Mr. Olgun has pointed out, with Russia coming in quite aggressively into the Middle East and what have you, it is not in the interest of the Western world in general to keep this saber rattling going on, and they have to basically address the problem. How much longer could they shun Turkey and Turkish Cypriots on that issue? I think time had been ticking, and time has come now for major decisions. Now, just one short note about your schoolmate, Antony Blinken. Well, he managed to actually post a tweet today about Turkey, which had all the positive elements and, surprise, surprise, with no reference about the S-400 missiles. So he may be coming round.
Fingers crossed. Okay, well, here's sort of my last question, and we'll give you all a chance to also wrap up your thoughts. And if you can be reasonably brief, that would also help. This is a question from Alp, and I think it's a very good question, which is why I'm asking it. Looking back over the past 40 years, the Greek Cypriot community have managed to persuade most of the world to see the Cyprus problem entirely through their eyes. How and why have they succeeded? And where have the Turkish Cypriots gone wrong? And what should the Turkish Cypriot community do better to change the perceptions that there are out there? In 30 seconds, each of you. I'll start with David.
Oh, goodness. impossible question.
Well, it's an important one because you and I, as MPs, and Jack is included, you know, the loudest voice has always been the Greek Cypriot community. They've done a very good job at promoting their narrative. The Turkish Cypriot community have not. So, you know, what can the essence of this question is, what can the Turkish Cypriot community do better to get their message out there?
Well, I won't talk about the Turkish leader then. I'll talk about the Turkish Cypriot community.
Yeah.
Engage with members of parliament throughout the country, make their case, go to their surgeries, see them face to face, and gently say, look, we're decent people. We want to work with you. You've left the European Union. Please, may our voice be heard in Westminster.
Okay, Lord Northbrook.
Totally agree with David. Better publicity and engaging with parliamentarians more, I think.
Okay, Professor Ünal.
Previous speakers, certainly better publicity and basically not to let the Greeks alone in the Western world.
Okay, and Dr. Olgun.
Well, alliance building, overlapping interests with significant players, international players, and PR are key elements. And naturally, Alper he's got the experience as a diplomat behind all this. That's why he's asking these questions. But basically, yes, Turkish Cypriots lack PR. They need to invest more in that, and they need to build overlapping interests with major powers.
Right. Again, the final word to Jack.
Well, I agree with colleagues who've spoken up to now, particularly that which David and Lord Northbrook said. Just to add this, that there will be people within the United Kingdom of Turkish Cypriot heritage, some of whom will be natural Conservative voters, some natural Labour voters, some for middle parties. If that's the case, then we can really help this cause if you, depending on your overall political view, you get involved in one of the, or other, and I'd suggest the major political parties. So if you're on the right, join the Conservative Party, get involved, and if you're on the left, join the Labour Party, get involved, and then use that as a means of lobbying your own representative who will either be Conservative or Labour. That can make a very, very big difference if you can get those alongside all the other things that have been suggested.
Yeah, and I don't want to leave my Liberal Democrat friends out of the frame. If there are any Liberal Democrats out there, feel free to lobby your
there's your remaining
Liberal Democrat MPs that are there. Okay, okay. So well, I'd like to thank each of our panelists for their contributions this evening. Professor Ünal, Lord Northbrook, Sir David Amess, Ergün Olgun, and Jack Straw. Thank you very much for your contributions this evening. I'd like to also thank really all of our listeners out there, all the people who have gotten engaged, not just this evening, but over the past 3 webinars that we've had. You know, once again, we've got a huge amount of questions unanswered. I think we've got 76 in the pipeline this evening that have yet to be answered. So I'm sorry we haven't got to you. But I will say, please look out for information regarding future webinars on this issue, of which I'm sure there will be in the months and years ahead. As I've said before, sadly, this is my final webinar. I've enjoyed my time working on this interesting and crucial issue. I've certainly learned a lot because, you know, I came from really not understanding both sides of the argument. So I've certainly learned a lot. I'd like to thank the organizers who've worked tirelessly behind the scenes. And I truly hope that Cyprus can find a new solution to its problems for all of us and for future generations. I'd really like to finish off this evening with a closing statement by our sponsors of this evening's event, the CTCA, the BTCA, and the Circle Foundation. And this is what they say. We stress the need for political, economic, and social parity and a level playing field for peace and stability in Cyprus to succeed. Both the EU and the international community have failed to secure this, despite the fact that the two sides are recognized as political equals, and their promises that the unjustified restrictions on Turkish northern Cyprus will be lifted. An alternative plan B or a two-state solution has to be tabled as a serious option. Otherwise, the Greek Cypriots will continue to take advantage of the present situation. I'd like to thank you all once again for participating in this evening's event and wish you a good evening.